So this slide gives you a diagram of the process I described in the last study. Let's say I want to know if attending a quality after-school enrichment program improves elementary school students' grades. So my independent variable is whether they attend that good after-school program or not, and my dependent variable is student grades. Okay, very clear cut. Independent variable, program attendance, yes or no. Dependent variable, grades. But then I start thinking about it, and I want you to think about it for a minute too. Let's think about it together. What types of confounding variables might there be in that relationship between attending the program and grades? Yeah, you're right. IQ, innate intelligence, might make a difference. So in order to know if it's my program and not intelligence that affects student grades, I want to make sure that my two groups are pretty fairly matched on intelligence. So what I'll do, and this is that step one in the previous slide, is I'll give all of my students an IQ test, and I will, according to their score on the test, put them in sets based on their IQ. So as you can see here, and you can I'm looking at that chart in the middle of this slide, and I'm looking at the bands of colors. So that the first, what I'm calling the first set, is those top two students, ID 1 and 2. One had an IQ of 120 and one had an IQ of 119. So my students with the top IQ scores are in set 1. My students with the IQ scores after that, third and fourth, are in set 2. They've got 117 and 117. My students with the IQ slightly below that are in group 3, students 5 and 6. That's 114 and 113 for their IQs. And so on. So you can see that I put the students in sets, and the size of the set, or the number of students in the set, equaled the number of conditions in my study. So in this case, I had 2 conditions. I had one attending the program or not attending the program. So my set had 2 students in it, or 2 participants in it. Now, if I had 3 conditions in my study, my set would have 3 participants, and 1 participant would go in each of the sets. If I had 4 conditions in my study, my set would have 4 participants. 1 participant would go in each set. So that's not exactly rocket science, but you can see why the number of students or participants in each set must match the number of conditions, because 1 participant from each set has to go into a condition. So another thing I want you to note about this slide is that I want you to notice those arrows from the central chart going to the groups. And if you look at it carefully, you'll see that those arrows are kind of random. My first gut reaction to doing this was just to put the first person from each set in group 1 and the second person from each set in group 2. But I can't do that. And I'm going to stop for a minute to see if you guys can think of a reason why I can't do that. Oh, you are so smart today. Yes, if I put the top person in each group, in each set, into group 1, if I put the top person in each set into group 1 would be slightly smarter than group 2. And I don't want that. I want the groups to be fairly equal on IQ. So that's why you have to randomly assign participants from each set into conditions. So that's matched assignment. And I'm going to give you one more real life example. Then I'm going to give you a little break and come back and finish the lecture. So matched assignment is a pretty special type of design. It's got several strengths and weaknesses. The strengths are it's sensitive to very small differences between groups. So because those groups are so equal on the variable that we match them on, that's a really powerful design. If there's a difference between the conditions, it's going to show up because the groups were so equal to start out with. And the second strength is there aren't any sequence effects. So we're going to talk about these later on when we talk about within subjects designs. But basically, sequence effects are something that happen when you go through, when the same people go through conditions in order. And we'll talk about that in a couple minutes. The weaknesses is it's extra work to match participants. And the example I gave on the last slide, I had to give people an extra IQ test. I had to make the chart and randomly assign them. It can be a lot of extra work to match participants. And then finally, participants without matches can't be used. So to illustrate that, one important use of matched subjects designs is in a case of an illness. So I know in certain studies where the disease has a progression, like HIV, and they're trying to understand the effect of medication on the progression of the disease, they'll want to make the groups as matched as possible on the progression of the disease. So if we've got someone who's very, very far advanced and we don't have a partner for them to put in another group or another condition, we can't use that person, because that person would make the groups unequal. So participants without matches can't be used in matched designs. So here's an example. Starting with the question, does background noise affect memory? So in this particular study, I'm interested, and this might be pretty relevant to your lives right now, I'm interested to know if having loud music in the background affects my ability to study, or people's abilities to study. So what I did, or what I'm going to do for my study, with where my independent variable is loud noise in the background, yes or no, and my dependent variable is performance on the memory test. And you can see here, we're keeping it very low tech. We're doing that memory test where you put playing cards face down, and people have to remember where certain cards are and try to make matches. They have to try to find matched pairs. So I want to know if background noise affects memory. And I design a study where I'm going to have two groups of participants. One is going to try to do the memory test when there's loud music in the background. Let's say Drake, and the other one super loud music, and then the other group is going to do the task where there's no loud music in the background. But wait, I suspect that the way that noise affects memory is related to age. And those of you that are taking my online adult development class might be reading this just about now, but we know that as we get older, our ability to select our attention or direct our attention to focus sometimes gets impaired with age. And so I know that this relationship is pretty strong. So I think that age might be a confounding variable. So I'm going to match my groups on age. So what I do is step one, I get the ages of all the participants in my study and I match them by sets. So it's a small study. I've got 8 participants in my study. I take the youngest two, which are 23 and 24 years old. the next youngest two, the middle-aged ones, and then the older middle-aged ones. So that oldest set is 59 and 60 years. I get their ages and I put them in sets of 2 participants. And then I randomly assign participants in each set to conditions. So first, just like I did in that other slide, I randomly assign one participant from each set to a group, and then I put those groups in conditions. So what I have now is the same study I had before, but now our groups are matched on age. They're more similar on age. So what that's going to do, and I said this before, but I think it might be a little easier to understand if I express it in this context. Because the groups are matched on age, if there's a slight difference between the music and the no music condition, it's going to show up. I'm going to see that result because my results are not going to be confounded by the age of the participants. My groups, because I matched them, are pretty similar on age. So that's your example of a matched subjects design. I hope it was helpful. I'm going to stop this movie here and so you can have a break, get a cup of coffee, a glass of water, stretch, and I'm going to come back to finish this lecture with the next movie. See you soon.